Yossarian crawled into the rear section of the plane over the bomb bay after Dobbs had beseeched him on the intercom to help the gunner. Please help the gunner. Yossarian's stomach turned over when his eyes first beheld the macabre scene. He was revolted, and he paused in fright a few moments before descending. Crouched on his hands and knees in the narrow tunnel over the bomb bay, beside the sealed corrugated carton containing the first aid kit. Snowden was lying on his back on the floor with his legs stretched out, still burdened cumbersomely by his flak suit, his flak helmet, his parachute harness, and his Mae West. Not far away on the floor lay the small tail gunner in a dead faint. The wound Yossarian saw was in the outside of Snowden's thigh, as large and deep as a football, it seemed. It was impossible to tell where the shreds of his coveralls ended and the ragged flesh began. There was no morphine in the first aid kit, no protection for Snowden against pain but the numbing shock of the gaping wound itself. The 12 syrettes of morphine had been stolen from their case. Quickly he began drawing a tourniquet around Snowden's thigh because he could not think what else to do in those first tumultuous moments when he knew he must act competently and feared he might go to pieces. Snowden watched him steadily, saying nothing. No artery was spurting, but Yossarian kept on, because applying a tourniquet was something he did know how to do. He worked with simulated skill and composure, feeling Snowden's lackluster gaze resting upon him. He recovered possession of himself before the tourniquet was finished, and loosened it immediately to lessen the danger of gangrene. His mind was clear now, and he knew how to proceed. He rummaged through the first aid kit for scissors. "I'm cold," Snowden said softly. "I'm cold." "You're going to be all right, kid," Yossarian reassured him with a big grin. "You're going to be all right." "I'm cold," Snowden said again in a frail, childlike voice. "I'm cold." "There, Yossarian said, because he didn't know what else to say. There. Yossarian was frightened and moved more swiftly. He began cutting carefully through Snowden's coveralls high up above the wound, just below the groin. The tiny tail gunner woke up while Yossarian was cutting with the scissors, saw him, and fainted again. Snowden rolled his head to the other side of his neck in order to stare at Yossarian more directly. A dim, sunken light glowed in his weak and listless eyes. Yossarian, puzzled, tried not to look at him. He cut downward through the coveralls along the inside seam until he reached the bottom and peeled open the severed leg of the garment. It fell to the floor with a plop. Yossarian was stunned at how waxen and ghastly Snowden's bare leg looked, how loathsome. The wound he saw now was not nearly as large as a football, but as long and wide as his hand. The raw muscles inside twitched like live hamburger meat. A long sigh of relief escaped slowly through Yossarian's mouth when he saw that Snowden was not in danger of dying. The blood was already coagulating inside the wound, and it was simply a matter of bandaging him up and keeping him calm until the plane landed. He removed some packets of sulfanilamide from the first aid kit. Snowden quivered when Yossarian turned him up slightly on his side. "Did I hurt you?" "I'm cold," Snowden whimpered. "I'm cold." There, Yossarian said. There. "It's starting to hurt me," Snowden cried out suddenly. Yossarian scrambled frantically through the first aid kit in search of morphine again, and found only Milo's note and a bottle of aspirin. He cursed Milo and held 2 aspirin tablets out to Snowden. He had no water to offer. Snowden rejected the aspirin with an almost imperceptible shake of his head. His face was pale and pasty. "I'm cold," Snowden moaned with half-closed eyes. "I'm cold." The edges of his mouth were turning blue. Yossarian was petrified. He wondered whether to pull the ripcord of Snowden's parachute and cover him with the nylon folds. Glancing up unexpectedly, Snowden gave him a wan, cooperative smile and shifted the position of his hips a bit so that Yossarian could begin salting the wound with sulfanilamide. Yossarian poured envelope after envelope of the white crystalline powder into the bloody oval wound until nothing red could be seen. Quickly he covered the whole wound with a large cotton compress and jerked his hand away. Next he began binding the compass in place with a roll of gauze. Then he made the whole thing fast with a tidy square knot. It was a good bandage, he knew, and he sat back on his heels with pride, wiping the perspiration from his brow. And he grinned at Snowden. "I'm cold," Snowden moaned. "I'm cold." "You're going to be all right, kid," Yossarian assured him, patting his arm comfortingly. "Everything's under control." Snowden shook his head feebly. "I'm cold," he repeated, with eyes as dull and blind as stone. "I'm cold." There, said Yossarian with growing doubt. "We'll be back on the ground soon, and everything will be okay." But Snowden kept shaking his head, and pointed at last, with just the barest movement of his chin, down toward his armpit. Yossarian bent forward and saw a strangely colored stain seeping through the coveralls just above the armhole of Snowden's flak suit. Yossarian felt his heart stop, then pound so violently he found it difficult to breathe. Snowden was wounded inside his flak suit. Yossarian ripped open the snaps of Snowden's flak suit and heard himself scream wildly as Snowden's inside slithered down to the floor in a soggy pile and just kept dripping out. A chunk of flak more than 3 inches big had shot into his other side just underneath the arm and blasted all the way through, drawing whole mottled quarts of Snowden along with it through the gigantic hole in his ribs it made as it blasted out. Yossarian screamed a second time and squeezed both his hands over his eyes. His teeth were chattering in horror. He forced himself to look again. Here was God's plenty, all right, he thought bitterly as he stared. Liver, lungs, kidneys, ribs, stomach, and bits of the stewed tomato Snowden had eaten that day for lunch. Yossarian hated stewed tomatoes and turned away dizzily and began to vomit, clutching his burning throat. The tail gunner woke up while Yossarian was vomiting, saw him, and fainted again. Yossarian was limp with exhaustion, pain, and despair when he finished. He turned back weakly to Snowden, whose breath had grown softer and more rapid, and whose face had grown paler. All this time he had been treating Snowden for the wrong wound. He wondered how in the world to begin to save him now. "I'm cold," Snowden whimpered. "I'm cold." There, Yossarian mumbled mechanically in a voice too low to be heard. There. Yossarian was cold, too, and shivering uncontrollably. He felt goose pimples clacking all over him as he gazed down despondently at the grim secret Snowden had spilled all over the messy floor. It was easy to read the message in his entrails. Man was matter. That was Snowden's secret. Drop him out a window and he'll fall. Set fire to him and he'll burn. Bury him and he'll rot, like other kinds of garbage. The spirit gone, man is garbage. That was Snowden's secret. Ripeness was all. "I'm cold," Snowden said. "I'm cold." There, said Yossarian. There. He pulled the ripcord of Snowden's parachute and covered his body with the white nylon sheets. "I'm cold." There. Yossarian walked out of the police station and down the stairs into the dark, tomb-like street. He thought he knew now why Nately's whore wanted to kill him. It was a man's world, and she and everyone younger had every right to blame him and everyone older for every unnatural tragedy that befell them. There was no sign of Milo outside. There were no lights in any of the windows. The deserted sidewalk rose steeply and continuously for several blocks. He could see the glare of a broad avenue at the top of the long cobblestone incline. The police station was almost at the bottom. The yellow bulbs at the entrance sizzled in the dampness like wet torches. A frigid fine rain was falling. He began walking slowly, pushing uphill. Soon he came to a quiet, cozy, inviting restaurant with red velvet drapes in the windows and a blue neon sign near the door that said, "Tony's Restaurant, fine food and drink, keep out." The words on the neon sign surprised him mildly for only an instant. Nothing warped seemed bizarre anymore in his strange, distorted surroundings. The tops of the sheer buildings slanted in weird, surrealistic perspective, and the street seemed tilted. He raised the collar of his warm woolen coat and hugged it around him. The night was raw. A boy in a thin shirt and thin tattered trousers walked out of the darkness on bare feet. The boy had black hair, needed a haircut and shoes and socks. His sickly face was pale and sad. His feet made grisly, soft, sucking sounds in the rain puddles on the wet pavements as he passed. And Yossarian was moved by such intense pity for his poverty that he wanted to smash his pale, sad, sickly face with his fist and knock him out of existence, because he brought to mind all the pale, sad, sickly children in Italy that same night who needed haircuts and needed shoes and socks. He made Yossarian think of cripples and of cold and hungry men and women, and of all the dumb, passive, devout mothers with catatonic eyes nursing infants outdoors that same night, with chilled animal udders bared insensibly to that same raw rain. Cows. Almost on cue, a nursing mother padded past holding an infant in black rags, and Yossarian wanted to smash her too, because she reminded him of the barefoot boy in the thin shirt and thin tattered trousers, and of all the shivering, stupefying misery in a world that never yet had provided enough heat and food and justice for all but an ingenious and unscrupulous handful. What a lousy earth. He wondered how many people were destitute that same night, even in his own prosperous country. How many homes were shanties, how many husbands were drunk and wives socked, and how many children were bullied, abused, abandoned. How many families hungered for food they could not afford to buy. How many hearts were broken. How many suicides would take place that same night. How many people would go insane. How many winners were losers, successes, failures, rich men, poor men. How many wise guys were stupid. How many happy endings were unhappy endings. How many honest men were liars, brave men cowards, loyal men traitors. How many sainted men were corrupt. How many people in positions of trust had sold their souls to blackguards for petty cash. How many had never had souls. How many straight and narrow paths were crooked paths. How many best families were worst families, and how many good people were bad people. When you added them all up and then subtracted, you might be left with only the children, and perhaps an old violinist or sculptor somewhere. Yossarian walked in lonely torture, feeling estranged, and could not wipe from his mind the excruciating image of the barefoot boy with sickly cheeks, until he turned the corner of the avenue finally, and came upon an Allied soldier having convulsions on the ground. 6 other soldiers from different countries wrestled with different parts of him, striving to help him and hold him still. He yelped and groaned unintelligibly through clenched teeth, his eyes rolled up into his head. "Don't let him bite his tongue off," a short sergeant near Yossarian advised shrewdly. And a 7th man threw himself into the fray to wrestle with the ill lieutenant's face. A jeep raced up with a flashing red spotlight at the side, and 2 military policemen in the front seat. Yossarian recalled that he had no leave papers, and moved prudently past the strange group, toward the sound of muffled voices emanating from a distance inside the murky darkness ahead. The broad, rain-blotched boulevard was illuminated every half-block by short, curling lampposts with eerie, shimmering glares surrounded by smoky brown mist. From a window overhead he heard an unhappy female voice pleading, "Please don't, please don't." A despondent young woman in a black raincoat passed with her eyes lowered. At the Ministry of Public Affairs on the next block, a drunken lady was backed up against one of the fluted Corinthian columns by a drunken young soldier, while 3 drunken comrades in arms sat watching nearby on the steps, with wine bottles standing between their legs. "Please don't," begged the drunken lady. "I want to go home now. Please don't." One of the 3 sitting men cursed pugnaciously and hurled a wine bottle down at Yossarian when he turned to look up. The bottle shattered harmlessly far away with a brief and muted noise. Yossarian continued walking away at the same listless, unhurried pace, hands buried in his pockets, "Come on, baby," he heard the drunken soldier urge. "It's my turn now." "Please don't," begged the drunken lady. "Please don't." At the very next corner, a man was beating a dog with a stick like the man who was beating the horse with a whip in Raskolnikov's dream. Yossarian strained helplessly not to see or hear. The dog whimpered and squealed in brute, dumbfounded hysteria at the end of an old manila rope, and groveled and crawled on its belly without resisting, but the man beat it anyway with his heavy, flat stick. A small crowd watched. A squat woman stepped out and asked him please to stop. "Mind your own business," the man barked gruffly, lifting his stick as though he might beat her too. And the woman retreated sheepishly with an abject and humiliated air. Yossarian quickened his pace to get away, almost ran. The night was filled with horrors, and he thought he knew how Christ must have felt as he walked through the world, like a psychiatrist through a ward full of nuts, like a victim through a prison full of thieves. What a welcome sight a leper must have been. At the next corner, a man was beating a small boy brutally in the midst of an immobile crowd of adult spectators who made no effort to intervene. Yossarian recoiled with sickening recognition. He was certain he had witnessed that same horrible scene some time before. The sinister coincidence shook him, filled him with doubt and dread. It was the same scene he had witnessed a block before, although everything in it seemed quite different. What in the world was happening? Would a squat woman step out and ask the man to please stop? Would he raise his hand to strike her? And would she retreat? Nobody moved. The child cried steadily as though in drugged misery. The man kept knocking him down with hard open palm blows to the head, then jerking him up in order to knock him down again. No one in the sullen, cowering crowd seemed to care enough about the stunned and beaten boy to interfere. The child was no more than 9. One drab woman was weeping silently into a dirty dish towel. The boy was emaciated and needed a haircut. Bright red blood was streaming from both ears. Yossarian crossed quickly to the other side of the immense avenue to escape the nauseating sight and found himself walking on human teeth, lying on the drenched, glistening pavement near splotches of blood. Molars and broken incisors lay scattered everywhere. He circled on tiptoe the grotesque debris and came near a doorway containing a soldier crying and holding a saturated handkerchief to his mouth, supported as he sagged by 2 other soldiers waiting in grave impatience for the military ambulance that finally came clanging up with amber fog lights on and passed them for an altercation on the next block between a single civilian Italian with books and a slew of civilian policemen with arm locks and clubs. The screaming, struggling civilian was a dark man with a face white as flour from fear. His eyes were pulsating in hectic desperation, flapping like bats' wings, as the many tall policemen seized him by the arms and legs and lifted him up. His books were spilled on the ground. "Help!" he shrieked in a voice strangling in its own emotion, as the policemen carried him to the open doors in the rear of the ambulance and threw him inside. "Police! Help! Police!" The doors were shut and bolted. The ambulance raced away. There was a humorless irony in the ludicrous panic of the man screaming for help to the police, while policemen were all around him. Yossarian smiled wryly at the futile and ridiculous cry for aid, then saw with a start that the words were ambiguous, realized that they were not perhaps intended as a call for police, but as a warning by a doomed friend to everyone who was not a policeman with a club and a gun and a mob of other policemen with clubs and guns to back him up. "Help! Police!" the man had cried, and he could have been shouting of danger. Yossarian responded to the thought by slipping away stealthily from the police and almost tripped over the feet of a burly woman of 40 hastening across the intersection guiltily, darting furtive, vindictive glances behind her toward a woman of 80 with thick, bandaged ankles doddering after her in a losing pursuit. The old woman was gasping for breath as she minced along and muttering to herself in distracted agitation. There was no mistaking the scene. It was a chase. The triumphant first woman was halfway across the wide avenue before the second woman reached the curb. The nasty, small, gloating smile with which she glanced back at the laboring old woman was both wicked and apprehensive. Yossarian knew he could help the troubled old woman if she would only cry out, knew he could spring forward and capture the sturdy first woman and hold her for the mob of policemen nearby, if the second woman would only give him license with a shriek of distress. But the old woman passed by without even seeing him, mumbling in terrible, tragic vexation. And soon the first woman had vanished into the deepening layers of darkness, and the old woman was left standing helplessly in the center of the thoroughfare, dazed, uncertain which way to proceed, alone. Yossarian tore his eyes from her and hurried away in shame because he had done nothing to assist her. He darted furtive, guilty glances back as he fled in defeat, afraid the old woman might now start following him. And he welcomed the concealing shelter of the drizzling, drifting, lightless, nearly opaque gloom. Mobs, he thought, mobs with clubs and guns were in control everywhere. Major Sanderson, the psychiatrist at the hospital, did not like Yossarian's personality. "It's split right down the middle," said Major Sanderson. He smiled ostentatiously to show himself reasonable and nice. "Now, I'm not saying that to be cruel and insulting," he continued, with cruel and insulting delight. "I'm not saying it because I hate you and want revenge. I'm not saying it because you rejected me and hurt my feelings terribly. No, I'm a man of medicine, and I'm being coldly objective. I have very bad news for you, Yossarian. Are you man enough to take it?" "God, no," screamed Yossarian. "I'll go right to pieces." Major Sanderson flew into a rage. "Can't you do even one thing right?" he pleaded, turning beet red with vexation and crashing his fist down upon his desk. "The trouble with you is you think you're too good for all the conventions of society. You probably think you're too good for me also, don't you? Just because I came to puberty late. Well, do you know what you are? You're a frustrated, unhappy, disillusioned, undisciplined, maladjusted young man." Major Sanderson's disposition seemed to mellow as he reeled off the uncomplimentary adjectives. "Yes, sir," Yossarian agreed. "I think you're right." "Of course I'm right. You're immature. You've been unable to adjust to the idea of war." "Yes, sir," Yossarian admitted. "You have a morbid aversion to dying. You probably resent the fact that you're at war and might get your head blown off any second." "I more than resent it, sir," Yossarian amplified. "I'm absolutely incensed." "Aha. You have deep-seated survival anxieties, and you don't like bigots, bullies, snobs, or hypocrites. Subconsciously, there are many people you hate. Consciously, sir, consciously," Yossarian corrected. "I hate them consciously. You're antagonistic to the idea of being robbed, exploited, degraded, humiliated, or deceived. Misery depresses you. Ignorance depresses you. Persecution depresses you. Violence depresses you. Slums depress you. Greed depresses you. Crime depresses you. Corruption depresses you. You know, it wouldn't surprise me if you're a manic depressive." "Yes, sir," Yossarian agreed eagerly. "Maybe I am. Don't try to deny it." "I'm not denying it, sir," said Yossarian, pleased with the miraculous rapport that finally existed between them. "I agree with all you said." "Ah," said Major Sanderson, "then you admit you're crazy, do you?" "Crazy?" Yossarian was shocked. "What are you talking about? Why is any of that crazy? You're the one who's crazy." Major Sanderson turned red with indignation again and crashed his fist down upon his thighs. "Calling me crazy," he shouted, "is a typically sadistic and vindictive paranoid reaction. You really are crazy. Then why don't you send me home? And I'm going to send you home." But they didn't send Yossarian home. Yossarian was returned to combat and went running to Doc Daneeka to complain. Listen to me, he said to Doc Daneeka, seizing him by the shirt front. Do you know what they told me up at the hospital? I'm crazy. Did you know that? So, said Doc Daneeka. Really crazy. So, said Doc Daneeka. I'm nuts, Yossarian tried to explain. Cuckoo. Don't you understand? I'm off my rocker. They've got a licensed psychiatrist up at the hospital who examined me, and that was his verdict. I am insane. So, said Doc Daneeka. So? Yossarian was puzzled by Doc Daneeka's inability to comprehend. Don't you see what that means? Now you can take me off combat duty and send me home. They're not going to send a crazy man out to be killed, are they? And Doc Daneeka replied, who else will go? I'm going to run away, Yossarian announced in an exuberant, clear voice, already tearing open the buttons of his pajama tops. Oh, no, Major Danby groaned, and began patting his perspiring face rapidly with the bare palms of both hands. You can't run away. Where can you run to? Where can you go? To Sweden, Yossarian said. To Sweden? You'll never get there. But I can get to Rome if you'll keep your mouth shut when I leave here. Will you do it? They'll find you, Major Danby argued desperately, and bring you back here, and punish you. They'll have to try like hell to catch me. They will try like hell. And even if they don't find you, what kind of way is that to live? You'll always be alone. You'll always live in danger. I live that way now, Yossarian said. But you can't just turn your back on all your responsibilities and run away from them, Major Danby insisted. It's such a negative move. It's escapist. Yossarian laughed and shook his head. I'm not running away from my responsibilities. I'm running to them. There's nothing negative about running away to save my life. You know who the escapists are, don't you, Danby? Oh, no, not me. Chaplain, please talk to him, will you? He's deserting. He wants to run away to Sweden. Wonderful, cheered the chaplain, throwing on the bed a pillowcase full of Yossarian's clothing. Run away to Sweden, Yossarian, and I'll stay here and persevere. Yes, I'll persevere. I'll stay. Chaplain, will you please shut up, Major Danby entreated politely. Yossarian, listen. You'll never make it. It's impossible. It's almost a geographical impossibility to get to Sweden from here. Oh, hell, Danby, I know that. But at least I'll be trying. It's insane. Your conscience will never let you rest. God bless it, laughed Yossarian. I wouldn't want to live in this world without strong misgivings. What about the disgrace, Major Danby asked. I'm in more disgrace now, just being here. Yossarian tied a hard knot in the second shoelace and sprang to his feet. Well, Danby, I'm ready. Are you going to try to stop me? Major Danby hesitated one moment longer. Oh, no, of course not, he blurted out. And suddenly he was waving both arms toward the door. Of course I won't stop you. Go, for God's sakes, and hurry. Do you need any money? I've got money. Here's some more. With fervent, excited enthusiasm, Major Danby pressed a wad of Italian currency upon Yossarian and clasped his hand in both his own, as much to still his own trembling fingers as to give encouragement to Yossarian. Goodbye, Yossarian. How do you feel? Fine. No, I'm frightened. That's good, said Major Danby. It proves you're still alive. It won't be fun. Yossarian started to the door. Yes, it will, he said. I mean it, Yossarian. You'll have to keep on your toes every minute of every day. They'll bend heaven and earth to catch you. I'll keep on my toes every minute, Yossarian said. You'll have to jump, Major Danby warned. I'll jump, Yossarian vowed. Jump, Major Danby cried. Yossarian jumped. Nately's whore was hiding with her knife just outside the door. The knife came down, missing him by inches, and he took off.